Not in a society with so many multi-generational households. No country has been able to do that.
And that was to create something called the Future Fund. You heard the Prime Minister talk about the various loan grants and guarantees that we've made available throughout the crisis. Now, they worked quite well for traditional businesses, which had cash flows and profits before. They weren't well suited to start-up businesses like the ones you're describing, who were before that, pre-revenue stage. So what the Future Fund did is it shared the risk, exactly as you mentioned, between the government and investors. And what we said is we will match the investment that private investors put into these startup companies, whether that's in a Series A round or a seed round or an angel round, anywhere from a couple of £100,000 all the way up to 5 million. That fund has proved to be really successful. I think it's been warmly welcomed by the startup and entrepreneurial community all across the country, and it's funded just under 1,000 companies so far. And as you said, I'm hopeful that that will provide them with the financing they need to survive through the crisis, share the risk with the taxpayer, but then emerge stronger on the other side and help drive our growth and recovery.
Brilliant, thanks. Let's go to Laura Kuenssberger of the BBC.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister. Firstly to you, Chancellor. The problems with the first version of your job scheme that you've rewritten today were obvious to many people in industry from the start. Why do you keep underestimating the help that people really need? Sir Patrick, can I ask you if you agree with Scotland's Chief Medical Officer, who's told families there's no question of anything like a normal Christmas and they should plan to celebrate digitally? And Prime Minister, to you, this week you've been to war with leaders in the north of England. You're still leaving some workers on 2/3 of their wages or telling them to claim benefits. And cases of coronavirus keep on rising. Is this really the kind of leadership you think the country deserves?
Rishi.
Laura, I think it's a perfectly fair question to ask about the timing of this. I think if you think back to the summer when we designed the job support scheme in conjunction with business and business groups and unions, I think at that point we were looking forward to the economy reopening and restrictions being lifted. Now, what we've seen in the especially last 4 or 5 weeks, as these new restrictions have been put in place, the impact they're having on the ground has been highly significant, particularly to businesses in the hospitality sector, particularly in these tier 2 areas. And it's the cumulative weight of all these new restrictions has really, if you speak to anyone in this industry, they're seeing it in their numbers quite significantly over the past few weeks. And that's why, as we've always said, we will adapt and evolve our response as the situation changes. Now, as the health restrictions have changed and that's had an impact on the economy, I think it's right that we respond pragmatically and flexibly to that, because ultimately what we're trying to do is protect people's jobs and income, and the measures that we've put in place today, I'm confident will do just that, and this will be now in place for a while to come, and I think is very generous and effective support.
I think the numbers speak for themselves. They're increasing, and they're not going to decrease quickly. And I think it's likely that some measures of restriction are going to need to be in place for a while to try and get those numbers down. Obviously, the quicker you get the R below 1, the quicker numbers come down, and things then give a bit of room. And so a lot depends on what happens now over the next few weeks. At the moment, the numbers are headed in the wrong direction, but as I say, there are some signs in some places of a potential flattening off of that, and we need to wait and see and monitor the numbers very, very carefully.
Well, Laura, I'm afraid strongly reject what you say about me being at war with local leaders. That's not the case. We've had great conversations with local leaders, mayors, and others in Liverpool, in Lancashire, in Yorkshire, in the West Midlands, South Yorkshire, I should say, London, and everybody has come to the table, shown leadership, stepped up to the plate, and agreed to help bring the R down in that particular area, which is what we need to see. I'm grateful also to Andy Burnham in Greater Manchester, where he's agreed to help bring the R down with a package of measures in Tier 3. And as Patrick has just said, thanks to the efforts of people across the country, we are starting to see some progress. And it is early days yet, and it will be tough. But I really think that people do think across the country that this balanced approach, avoiding another full-scale national lockdown and avoiding letting the virus rip, is the right way forward. And that is what we are pursuing a balanced middle course, relying on local cooperation. And Laura, I must, as I say, I disagree with you. We've had fantastic and extensive local cooperation, and yes, it's tough, but we will certainly get through it very well. Let's go to Beth Rigby of Sky News.
Thank you, Prime Minister. Is the backdated Tier 2 business support today an acknowledgement that you were not supporting parts of the north of England properly for weeks during the summer? Andy Burnham's right, isn't he, when he says that you have neglected the north? And isn't this announcement today an attempt to right that wrong? And Sir Patrick, at a SAGE meeting on May the 1st, the SAGE committee agreed that at least 80% of contacts would be needed in the test and trace system to make it effective. The test and trace scheme is contacting less than 60% now. How disappointing is that? And what are the implications of it in terms of tackling this disease?
Beth, no, the issue is really one of basic fairness as between the various parts of the country that are having to experience regional restrictions. That's what we were trying to achieve in the last 10 days. What we're doing now is bringing forward measures that are designed to help businesses that can't trade as they normally would and are experiencing a fall in income, as Rishi has said. That's what we're trying to do. We're doing it, and we're doing it across the whole country, and it's backdated, as you know, to August. But Rishi,
I think I'd just echo what you said, Prime Minister, Beth. This is simply about fairness. It's about treating people the same wherever they live and whatever their situation. All the interventions that we've put in place are there on a national basis. And as different parts of the country experience different restrictions at different times, our various support measures, whether it's grants for businesses or the job support scheme, will be there to help them, their businesses, support their wages at whatever time that is. But we approach everything from a position of wanting people to have the equal support wherever they are, not just within England, but in every part of the United Kingdom as well.
Thanks very much, Beth. Let's go to Ben Kentish of LBC. Oh, sorry, Patrick, yes.
So on the test and trace, it's undoubtedly the case that test, trace and isolation becomes much more difficult to have an impact once numbers are high. So it's much more effective when numbers are low. That's the first point. The second point is that I think the testing system has ramped up the numbers they're able to do quite effectively, but it's really important to concentrate on numbers of contacts, isolation as quickly as you can, and getting things back as quickly as you can, ideally to get the whole process done within 48 hours. And it's very clear there's room for improvement on all of that, and therefore that will be diminishing the effectiveness of this. But the effectiveness anyway of test and trace is less when numbers are high than it is when numbers are low.
Thanks very much. Ben Kentish of LBC. Ben, you need to unmute, or somebody needs to unmute you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, got you.
Thank you, Prime Minister. I wanted to follow up on that issue, actually, because countries like South Korea, Germany and Taiwan have shown that there is an alternative to the sort of restrictions that much of the UK is now under, and that is a functioning test and trace system. We're testing more people than ever, but clearly something's going wrong. For example, in June, Prime Minister, you said you wanted 100% of test results to be back within 24 hours. Today, the current figure is just 15%. So what do you think's gone wrong there? And when can you assure the British public that that system will be effective enough to start to control the virus as it has in other countries? And just very quickly for the Chancellor, unprecedented times we're in, clearly unprecedented spending is needed to support people. But with UK debt hitting 2 trillion, the highest since the 1960s, how long do you believe that can go on for? And how concerned are you about that figure?
Well, first of all, Ben, on your point about NHS test and trace, look, I share people's frustrations, and I understand totally why we do need to see faster turnaround times, and we do need to improve it. We need to make sure that people who do get a positive test self-isolate. That's the absolutely crucial if this thing is going to work in the way that it can. But I just would stress to you, Ben, that the achievements of the testing operation have been colossal. You know, they have moved from a capacity of I think 3,000, 2,000 tests per day to about 300,000 now. We've tested 26 million tests, more than any other country in Europe, and they are on track to reach a capacity of 500,000 by the end of this month. And the technology is improving the whole time. But the crucial thing to get NHS test and trace to work is that if you test positive, then you've got to self-isolate. And don't forget that there's a £500 to help you with the cost of that, but also a £10,000 fine for not doing so. The thing depends on people self-isolating and breaking the transmission. It is helping a bit already to break the transmission. About 1 million people, as I say, have been 1 million contacts have been reached. But there is more that it can do if everybody complies once they're contacted by NHS Test and Trace.
Ben, you're right to highlight the unprecedented increase in borrowing that's happening this year and the consequent rise in our debt levels to close to 100% of debt to GDP. And as you said, those are unprecedented numbers at unprecedented times. Now, whilst it is right to act, I think, with scale during a crisis like this to try and protect jobs and employment, and ultimately that will protect our economy in the long run, it's also right that because of those numbers that you highlighted, that we always have one eye on the long-term public finances, because we want to make sure that we are careful with that. It's clearly not sustainable to carry on acting in this way forever. So as we continue intervening in the economy, it's right that that is targeted and effective and done in a way that we won't always be able to do absolutely everything that everyone would like us to do. And it's because of that, because of the things that you highlighted, that will be the case, that we've got to have one eye on the long-term health of the economy and public finances and make sure that, you know, once we get through this, we can return those public finances and the economy to a strong and sustainable position.
Thanks very much, Rishi. Let's go to Chris Smith of The Times.
Thank you. Chancellor, firstly, just picking up on your last point, given that the government strategy now is to suppress the virus until a vaccine is found, and having accepted the need for more support today and saying it will be in place for a while to come, can you guarantee that this level of help will continue to be available until a vaccine is in widespread use? And then to Prime Minister and Sir Patrick on test and trace again. Sir Patrick, you said that it's more effective when numbers are low and it's diminishing effectiveness as cases rise. So have we now missed our moment effectively for this system to work? Is it salvageable, or are cases now just increasing too quickly to keep up?
Chris, I mean, I'll let the Prime Minister and Patrick comment on the vaccine and the part that that plays or doesn't in the medium-term strategy. But what we wanted to do was give businesses and employees some certainty and ability to plan through, you know, what is clearly going to be a difficult winter period. So what we have said is that the job support scheme, which starts on November 1st when furlough finishes, will last for at least 6 months. So it will last through to the spring. There will be a review point in the middle so we can have a look at it and make sure that it's working well. But that support in its guise will be there through this difficult period through to the spring to give people that certainty. And because we know, as the Prime Minister said a while back, this is something that will be a fact of our lives for some months to come. I think more broadly, most of the economic interventions we've made also now have that predictability through to the spring, whether it's the business rates holidays or the changes we've made to some of the loan programs or the VAT cut for hospitality. Again, all of that will provide cash support to businesses and people, you know, throughout this period. But I'll let the Prime Minister and Patrick talk about the kind of medium-term outlook.
Well, I just add one obvious point, Chris, to what Rishi has just said, and that's, you know, clearly this is what we're announcing today is billions more going into to support the UK economy, support jobs and livelihoods, and that's right. It's far better to do that and keep the economy going, because we're going to have to pay this money back. And we want to be in a position where the UK economy, where, you know, companies are kept alive, jobs are supported, people's skills are maintained, their energies are maintained, so that the UK can bounce back as strongly as possible once, as you say, we get the virus back under control. And that's the objective. And I think that if you look at the way the science is changing, and you look at the improvements in treatments, in therapies, in drugs, look at the changes we're seeing in and the improvements in some changes in the mortality rates, I am confident that we will get through this very well in due course. But for the moment, and improvements in testing technologies, as I said last week, really interesting improvements in testing technologies. But for the moment, we have to use the same tools that we've got, which is the social distancing measures, all those restrictions that we put in place, and we have to do that at a local and a regional level, because that's the commonsensical thing to do. And if we do it together in the way that we can, and we follow the guidance together in the disciplined way that we can, and by the way, the way that people of all age groups seem to be doing across the country, then we will drive that R down again, and we will get it under control. And in the meantime, we will have supported our businesses, kept them alive, kept jobs going, and we'll be in a better position to come out of it. That's what we're doing. Patrick.
On vaccines, I think things are progressing well. There are vaccines that produce an immune response. They're in phase 3 clinical trials. We should be seeing some data readouts over the course of this year. But I remain of the view that the possibility of sort of wider spread use of vaccines isn't going to be until spring or so next year, by the time we get enough doses and enough understanding of the outputs to use them. Now, we may get a few doses this side of Christmas, maybe something could happen, but I think we should more realistically be looking at spring. And of course, there are no guarantees until the studies have read out. So we need to be cautious and carry on, but there is a good progress in terms of the vaccines. In terms of test and trace and the number of cases, test and trace will work effectively across parts of the UK where cases are lower. That's when it can work most effectively. It has much less of an impact at the areas where you've got very high levels, and that's why additional measures are taken, and that's why additional isolation measures, having to take difficult decisions around premises that need to be shut and so on. That's why they need to be taken, because at that point you can't really control it any other way than by stopping contacts, and stopping contacts in environments in which transmission is most likely to take place. And then what test and trace does above that and isolate is to try and remove from circulation as far as you can those people who are infectious. And as new testing methods come on train, that may be more possible more widely, but at the moment it's very difficult to remove everybody who's infectious from a situation where you've got high levels, which is why it's so important to get them down.
And why it's so important to self-isolate if you get a positive test, because if that doesn't happen, then obviously a lot of the force of test and trace is lost. Let's go to Richard Partington of The Guardian.
Thank you very much. Question for you, Prime Minister, and the Chancellor. I wanted to ask why the government was prepared to go to the wall earlier this week over £5 million with Andy Burnham, when you were preparing to announce billions of pounds of more support today through this expansion in the job support scheme. The Chancellor and the Community Secretary were pictured meeting business leaders in London this morning. Does this mean that London is of a higher priority than the north of England for the government? And then a second, if I may, why wait so long to announce these major reversals in policy when business leaders will have been making decisions about what to do when the furlough scheme ends for several months now? Does this not have a detrimental effect on employment, and should the government not have acted quicker?
I mean, sorry, Richard. I think you directed the question at both of us, but I'll quickly say my bit. Look, this was the negotiations between regional leaders, between metro mayors, was all about fairness. That's what that discussion was about. It was about making sure that everybody got the same package. What we're trying to do now is address a national issue, which is that obviously since the virus started to come up again, there's been much more concern, particularly amongst the business community, about people's ability to protect jobs and livelihoods because of the effects of the virus. And as the campaign adjusts, the fight against the virus changes, and obviously we change our response. That's only logical. But Rishi.
Yes, I echo that, Prime Minister. I think Richard, when we designed the job support scheme together with businesses that you mentioned about and unions, it was done over the summer with a view to the economy being open and restrictions being lifted. Now, obviously, the last few weeks, that has not been as those businesses had expected. Those restrictions were coming back. They were having a cumulative effect on the ground, particularly in Tier 2 areas, particularly in hospitality, and that's been the cumulative weight of the changes and the impact more broadly on consumer confidence that we've seen. And that's why we've been in discussions to try and see what changes we could make that would do what we want to do, which is to try and protect jobs and employment at this difficult time. And with regard to the meeting this morning, you're right, I was meeting together with the Community Secretary with representatives from businesses, unions, and indeed, in particular, the hospitality sector. There were plenty of people on Zoom as well, indeed, from, I remember, from Merseyside and North Yorkshire, as well as other places around the country. So I wouldn't take anything from the fact that the meeting happened to be held in London. And you're right, that was held in a restaurant that was closed to the public at the time and was used as a meeting for us, for Franca Manca. And I think it's important that we highlight the particular impact of what's happening on the hospitality sector, and that's why we were there, to bring that issue to light. That's what we were discussing. How are these social restrictions having an impact on hospitality businesses like that across the country? And how can we adapt and evolve our support to try and help those businesses protect as many jobs as people? And there are 2 million people who work in that sector. I've said repeatedly that those people typically are younger, women, ethnic minorities, on lower pay, and it is a matter of social justice that we do what we can to try and protect as many of those jobs as possible.
Thanks very much. Let's go lastly to Jane Kirby of the Press Association.